Hi everyone, and welcome back to our usual webinars, which is happening every Tuesday and Thursday. I see that the numbers slightly dropping down, but we still have a lot of people in the lockdowns, and that's mostly the people who are joining us at the minute. But I'm very happy that we are back on the water. Even us, we are officially allowed to go out from Friday this week. And probably we will slow down a little bit with the webinars, but there is a still high demand and people are looking into our recordings. So we are doing it for all the people in the world which are missing it, or they're on the water, so they can later on watch the recordings. So it's also very popular. So we are gonna keep doing this stuff. And we've done a webinar with Jon Emmett last week on Thursday, and today is going to be part 2. For people who didn't attend, I'll introduce quickly Jon. So Jon is the coach of Lila Shu, the Golden Lily, who got the gold medal in London 2012 and silver medal in bronze medal in Beijing Olympics. Jon was coaching for 20 years, and he's well known in the elite level coaching, and he's done an amazing job with writing books for people who don't have much coaching, and they have access to the knowledge, and he's shared with us with all this stuff. So Jon, maybe you can switch on the camera and go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll kick off. Gotta say, thank you very much to SailCoach and Ilka for hosting, because I think this is such a good thing. And I was going to start the talk today just to wish everybody to stay safe now that things are starting to open up a little bit. I think in the UK, we're probably expecting a second wave in June. So we've been told to stay alert. Yeah. Staying alert, that just sounds like I need to double my caffeine intake or something like that, drink more coffee. But yeah, just for people to think and to really stay safe. And then we can all enjoy the wonderful sport of sailing. So my name's Jon Emmett. I had a really good introduction again from Alex. And I think we can crack straight on with part 2. So the way Coach Yourself to Win works is I've divided sailing up into 20 areas. So if you imagine you've got a dartboard, and then the smaller the part of sailing, the smaller the box, the more improvement you can make in that area. It's very much about being specific. So I've just gone through 3 points for each topic, but of course there's a lot more than that. So first topic for today is upwind sailing. And I think this is incredibly important because getting off the line and having clean air, sailing the right way up the beat, and a good windward mark rounding is actually very good indication of your final finishing position in a race. So I have a picture of a 470 here because actually the more technical boats, the more and more important the rig setup becomes. Perhaps the beauty of the laser is we can make adjustments very easily on the water, but it still pays to think ahead. And I think as you go through your various different classes in your sailing career, the faster boats, the setup becomes more and more important, because it's not only actually the boat speed upwind, but how easy it is to sail the boat. So if you set a boat up for 5 knots and go out in 35 knots, you might break something. And if you set up for 35 knots, it's 5, maybe you'll be so depowered that you're completely uncompetitive. So this actually goes back very much to the things we talked about in the previous webinar. So looking at forecasts, venue preparation, and being prepared. So when we're sailing upwind, generally speaking, we're looking for VMG. That's velocity made good. So the maximum gain towards the windward mark at any one time. But when we looked at tactics, we realized that sometimes we will need to sail very high. So maybe to avoid being lee bowed or to lee bow somebody, or maybe we want to sail very low. So if there's a shift coming, or we're trying to get out of adverse current. So we call this pointing, sailing high or pinching, and footing is sailing low and as fast as you can. But it's important to remember we're still always looking at VMG. And this is actually important across all points of sail. And I think it's important, even though the fastest way to sail is probably somewhere in the middle, because it's easier. If you sail very, very low and fast, it's easier to miss a shift or sail extra distance. And if you try and point very high, it's very easy to hit a wave or to stall the rig. So actually, we may well end up sailing most of the course in a way which is easy to keep maximum boat speed, but you need those tools in the toolbox, especially if you find, for example, your ley line changes. So reaching is something we don't do as much now as perhaps we used to, but it's still a very important skill. And there was a surprising amount of place changing on the first reach at what was quite a windy World Championships in Sandringham Yacht Club this year for the lasers. That's the standards and the radials. So again, the rig setup is very important, and you need to make those changes as soon as possible. So preferably, actually, you make the change just before the leg of the course. In other words, you let the kicker off just before you go around the windward mark. You pull the Cunningham on just before you go upwind. So this rig setup, it's something you need to get your head out of the boat and think what you need to achieve. So for reaching, I often think the closer the setup is, the closer the course is to a beat, the closer the setup is to beating, and the closer the reach is to a run, likewise, it's set up close to a run. The thing you will find, though, is the gusts and lulls, because you're sailing across the wind, you have far more opportunity to take advantage of them. So we're looking at maintaining maximum hull speed. So if you're running 10 kilometers, it's really good to try and find a good 10-kilometer pace. So that means you need to try and maximize your speed in the light winds, and then in the strong winds, you can use that to sail a little bit extra distance. So when we talk about going for speed, this is sort of the fastest way to the next mark, which is sometimes, but not always, sailing the straight line. When we soak, we sail quite low, and this is taking advantage of the stronger wind. Effectively, that's going to put us in the stronger wind for longer, a greater amount of time. And it can also be true for current. So if you want to stay in favourable current or avoid an adverse current, you will change your course. So if I was in a helicopter high up in the sky, or maybe a drone these days, it would look like the boat was going in a straight line. However, when we zoom in, or perhaps chase them in a coach boat, you can see the wiggle line taking account of the different wind strengths, possibly wind directions, and of course the waves. So I think running is perhaps the point where there's the most opportunity for place changing on the downwind leg, especially as we often do windward leeward courses. And the setup here is not about just creating a bag of sail. It's not just catching the wind. It's about having flow. And a lot of people get a little bit confused about a death roll. So a death roll is simply where the wind is going from the leach to the luff, and then the luff to the leach, and the leach to the luff, and there's no flow. And the boat will wobble around a great deal. And it's something that is often resulting in a capsize. And I think as soon as that happens, you need to steer to the point of safety, which was where you previously were and where you had flow. Sailing by the lee in a laser, or most boats with an understowed rig, is very safe and often very fast. because the leach is actually now the mast, which is the most solid part of the sail. So the flow is going from the leach to the luff, and that's by the lee. Now the diagram here shows dead downwind with the sail at 90 degrees and you've got no flow, whereas if you sheet in slightly, then you get that flow, and you can check it by your telltales. It's interesting, a lot of the time the sail will actually be out around 90 degrees and you'll be steering angles for waves, because you wouldn't want to be sailing straight into waves, but that in itself it's another topic. The third point is probably more for high performance boats, but apparent wind sailing. So the best example of this is if you go cycling, which I think a lot of people are doing during the lockdown, you will really want to try and have a nice sunny light wind day in the countryside, much more pleasant. And you can cycle along in no wind at all, but because you're going 20 or 30 kilometers an hour, and I know some of the professional sailors will go much faster than that, but you will have a wind in front of you coming directly in the direction you're cycling 20 or 30 kilometers an hour. So that's the apparent wind, and the faster you go, the stronger that wind gets. And that means that effectively the wind changes direction to come more from the front. Good experience in a laser, if you ever catch a really nice wave and you're surfing down super fast, you may well find that the boom tries to come into the center of the boat because the wind is now effectively coming from the front of you. So that's something you need to be aware of with running. And if you look at the America's Cup boats, you'll find the sails just virtually always sheeted in the whole way. So it's actually quite difficult to tell whether they're sailing upwind or downwind. So apparent wind is becoming much more part of sailing today. And one of the things that any class of boat is important is the fitness. And during the winter in the UK, I do a lot of sailing talks, and this is probably the most common one. The first thing you have to do, just like when we talked about the tactics and strategies, define what is fitness. Because if you look at a jockey, somebody like Frankie Dettori, they're very, very fit. But if you compare them to a basketball player, your Michael Jordans or people of that ilk, they're very fit as well, but they have a very, very different body type. So fitness, the word fitness simply comes from being fit to do a task. So the fitness requirements for a windsurfer and a fin sailor are quite different, but they both have to be elite athletes. So when you look at what is fitness, you need to think, what is your body required to do? And the point I would say about fitness is you cannot be too fit. You can be too heavy or too light for your boat, but you cannot be too fit. So all these elements of fitness, your strength and your stamina and your suppleness and your speed, the 4 S's, will really help your sailing. Even if it's not a particularly windy regatta, just being fit means you have a better ability to recover, and that your body will be burning more fat and less carbohydrate and all sorts of added bonuses, and just to be more healthy. So what we have here on the left is a little run. I was going to say I did it a little while ago, but if you look closely, I think it was in 2007. I don't know if I run at that intensity anymore. Where we've got a steady peak of intensity. So this is around 160 beats per minute. And I'm a big fan. I've used the Polar brand for years, but now Garmin and whatnot have really caught up. There's so many devices there to track your fitness. And it goes back to the goal setting, which was the very first thing we talked about. And that was so important to achieve a goal. You need to know what you're trying to do. And if you track your fitness, you can see where you were, where you're trying to get to, where you are now. So that's a very important element of improving your fitness, and to measure everything. So we looked at the weights you lift and all these sort of things as a way of measuring progress. And it is important to remember what you're trying to achieve. So actually, if you're sailing a hiking boat, probably the most useful fitness is hiking, and probably the best way to get that is through hiking. Having said that, the other overriding premise of be your own sailing coach is to work on your weaknesses. And in terms of fitness, this will specifically help avoid injury. So making sure that you're supple enough, that is, you have good flexibility, and that your core is strong enough. It's no good being really, really strong if the inner muscles are not strong enough, because that frequently leads to lower back or indeed neck problems, which is something, unfortunately, a lot of laser sailors will have. So moving on, going to talk a little bit about diet and nutrition. Now, the word diet really should just mean what we eat. And it seems now that a lot of the time diet seems to be something restrictive. We go on a diet to lose weight, but diet should just be a way of eating. And in terms of what you're eating, it's like a car. If you put the wrong fuel or bad fuel in your car, it will really struggle to perform. And at worst case scenario, you might even break the engine. So the first thing is just look at the nutritional labeling. In most countries, by law, you have to see what's within what you're buying. So you can look at the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats, and make sure you have a balanced diet and you're not consuming too many calories. But also you want to be looking at relatively simple food types. So for example, when you buy a cereal, it contains perhaps just wheat rather than lots of added flavors, sugars, colorants, and preservatives, because these things don't do your body any good at all. So actually, often a rule of thumb, the fewer ingredients, the better. What you need to eat really depends on the level of exercise, and timing is also very important. We just looked at a graph for aerobic session. So when you're training aerobically, you tend to use carbohydrate, and the way or the reason for that is because chemically, and in a previous life I was a chemical engineer, chemically the carbohydrate is converted to glycogen, which is the fuel for your muscles, much better than fat, which takes a long time, and much better than protein, which would involve a lot of water. So consuming carbohydrate 30 minutes after exercise is very important, as well as high quality protein within 2 hours for your recovery. And then obviously the volume of carbohydrate that you need to consume depends on how much training you've done that day. And you can really listen to your body here and just monitor your body weight. I said in terms of fitness, you don't want to be having problems training because you haven't given yourself enough fuel. That's really important. And not actually included here, but hydration is just as important, if not more. So for example, if you have an isotonic drink, which is approximately 6.4 grams of carbohydrate within 100 milliliters of water, not only are you giving your body a bit of fuel, but that water will be retrained and you will be hydrating better than pure water alone. In fact, further than that, you can also have electrolytes, which can balance with your body's fluids, and that will increase absorption and retention. So there's lots to it there, and I think it just becomes a habit. I'm trying to think of the name of the brand I've started using now. I think it's called Morton from Sweden. But it's very important you will look at having a beverage that you enjoy and food that you enjoy, or you won't eat or drink enough. And diet suggestions, I went through this in my book for easy to make things, because we're quite lucky that naturally we tend to favor foods that go together. So if you just eat wheat and bread, you won't get a complete protein source. In fact, one of the few natural things with 100% of the amino acids you need is eggs. That's a very natural source. And it's the same with pulses. So things like beans. If you have beans, you won't have all the amino acids you need. But if you have beans on toast, perfect, you get it all done. And it's the same with cereals and dairy. But if you have milk on your cereal, then you get everything you need. So I did go through and make a few diet suggestions. And I think the body weight side of things is something that we're probably more aware of. As you get into elite sailing, the body weight becomes more crucial. And you'll find that the top 10, 20 sailors in the world, their body weights will tend to get closer and closer together. Whereas at club level, you may see a huge range of weights, and it depends where you sail. So in the UK, we have a lot of small inland puddles, which are very nice and beautiful, surrounded by trees where there's not much wind. I guess if you're sailing in San Francisco in the summer, you need to be prepared for a bit more. But when you're talking about either losing body weight or gaining body weight, and I'll keep this very simple, you need to do it in a slow and controlled way. So roughly 3,500 calories is about a pound in body weight. So a little over 7,000 calories for kilos. So if you're going to be losing fat, you need to do it slowly and controlled. And you don't just want to look at the scales, because you can lose a lot of weight through just being dehydrated. You need to be consistent. So first thing in the morning, go to the bathroom, step on the scales, same set of scales, same place, and then you can see how your body fat is dropping. And it's one of these things, we'll talk about it later, but it's there's a comfortable place to be, because too high or too low is not so healthy. The same with gaining body weight. You need to put the time into the gym, but we need to be careful about overtraining and possible illness, possible injury from pushing too hard, because you can work really hard and then you have an injury and you have to stop training and you lose those gains very quickly. So you need to think about that. And the protein you need for your body is probably not as high as many people think, around 1 gram per target kilogram. So if you want to be 80 kilos, having around 80 kilograms of high quality protein really is enough. Just remembering what we said about the amino acids, you have a good range of sources. And I think that's quite easy to do today. We can get really nice products made like recovery powders, which have the optimum amount of protein and carbohydrate already mixed. So that's the physical side of things, both fitness and the body weight, and those are the things that you can probably see very easily. The things which aren't quite so hard to measure, the mental side of things, and that's what's probably going to come out with high pressure situations. So being at regattas and having the correct attitude is really important. And this is both nature, who we are, and nurture. It's like any habit. The more you practice, the better you'll get. And I think the biggest thing with sailing is learning how to deal with the negatives, because there's so many variables which are completely beyond our control. You know, the race officer sends us racing in 4 knots or doesn't, or the race officer sends us in 32 knots and it's survival, or we're just very unfortunate with how the dice roll. But I would say 2 things here. The first one is, when I talk to the top sailors, the terminology you have is I missed a shift. So I missed a shift. That's something I should have taken advantage of, rather than seeing yourself as being unlucky that you missed the shift. And I think the way you deal with negatives is very important, because in terms of self-improvement, you can only actually improve yourself when you admit that you've made a mistake. And I think in the area of science, and it's true in sailing, there's always new innovations, there's always new theories, and things are always advancing. And sometimes just the most important thing is knowing how to relax. If you've got a 5-day regatta, you need to sleep well at night, which means having a good routine, and it means switching off when you need to. So we've talked now a little bit about concentration. So this is, if you like, the difference between the big picture and the small picture, or the difference between strategy and tactics. So mental stamina is your ability just to keep going over a prolonged period of time. And this is why it's good to do major championships, because you're really going to get that experience. Because however good a training's run, there isn't the same pressure there as you're going to have trying to win your world championships, your European championships, or even your club race. So it's that ability to maintain focus and to focus at the right time. So from the moment perhaps the 10 minutes starts to the moment you've safely cross the line, you need to focus, or perhaps in almost survival conditions far longer than that. So you might have to look at having you can only relax when the 49er is tied down and the sails are rolled and the cover's on. So this maintaining focus, it's like anything, that the more you do it, the easier it will become. And peak concentration, really, it's about finding that optimal level of stress, because too much stress can definitely be bad for you. But actually entering the race course under stressed is not optimal for your performance either. There's lots of things like this. I think the body fat one was very noticeable. You don't want to be overweight, because you're much better carrying additional weight as lean muscle tissue, but you don't want to be incredibly lean either, because that makes you much more susceptible to illness. Your body's meant to have a level of body fat somewhere between the two. And in the time of COVID-19, people will talk about immunity, and a lot of people talk about boosting immunity, and that's not a good idea either in a lot of cases. So if you have a very low level of immunity, you pick up every cough, cold, virus, bacteria infection that's going out there. That's obviously not good. But an overactive immunity can attack the body. We see this with transplants, organ transplants being rejected where the body attacks it. Things like arthritis where the body attacks itself. And of course, it looks like with COVID-19, some of the worst effects are caused by the immune system response rather than the virus itself. So this level of stress, maybe you need to think, am I a person who gets overstressed or understressed? And what can I do about that? So finally, we're coming back towards this idea of keeping record. So the training diary is really everything. So it's your mental preparation, your rig setup, your physical training. So we can look back and work out what went well and also what went wrong. So it's important to keep the good records. I would suggest now that we look at doing this with the electronic means. If you have something like Microsoft OneNote, you can have your training diary on all your devices, so you can look at it all the time. And I would recommend just to get into a habit. So every day, say 1 hour after your debrief or 1 hour after you sail, that's where you make your records, when it's fresh in your mind. I remember at university, I did lab experiments, and if I wrote them up immediately after doing them, it probably took half the time, and I probably did it 10% better than if I tried to write it down in a week's time. And that's really true for all good record keeping. And then finally, we can look at race analysis. Now we have tracking devices, and we can even have electronic devices put on the boats to measure the heel and the trim and the average speed. We really can go back and analyze the races. And in this period of time where we're not actively racing on the water, I've done an awful lot of that. And that's something I continue to look into, because I think every mistake is an opportunity to learn. So finally, we're going to be looking at the preparation here. Is your boat prepared, and dealing with boat work? So I think having some sort of checklist here is important. So you can go out and you know exactly what you're intending to do. It's rather like going to a supermarket. You're going to be much more productive with your time if you know your supermarket well. And if you have a list and you know exactly what you need. So the first thing you have to say is your boat prepared? Because like a lot of things, your boat can never be too prepared. There's no harm in having 2 spare kickers or having 2 spare main sheets. And it's like injury. You only think about it when you don't have what you need. So to have that responsibility that your boat is prepared, it's a very sort of professional attitude to have. And the same with dealing with boat work. You need to do it, if you like, before it needs to be done. Don't put it off for the so-called rainy day, the day you can't sail. Try and do it as soon as possible, because sometimes doing a little bit of boat work early is going to mean you don't have to do a lot of boat work later. And I said, that's why we have the checklists, because otherwise it's out of sight, out of mind. So getting back to the logistics, we've been through most of the sailing. I recently did a combined interview with Lily, and one of the comments that people had was about the true cost of sailing. And you can't get away from the fact that a full-time campaign does take a lot of time and money. That's the same for all elite sport, and that's why a lot of the people will have support from their government, from their whether it's the sort of the International Olympic Committee, their country's Olympic structure, their sailing federations, their clubs or sponsorships. So for those people who are thinking about going full time, do look into this. Okay, you don't want to get halfway through a season and find that perhaps you're struggling a little bit, and you can't do everything that you originally planned to. But even if you're just doing club sailing, and perhaps I shouldn't use the word just, club sailors make up very much the majority of. So just to think about the costs of your sailing and to time your replacements and to think ahead, which I think is true of a lot of things. So that was really the end of the presentation in terms of Coach Yourself to Win. I just hope that we can all get back on the water and racing as soon as possible. And this idea of us restarting sailing, it's very exciting, but it needs to be done in the right way. We don't there's a few people who are doing casual sailing, certainly where I am in Weymouth, and then we can move on to sort of informal racing and still keep this aggressive social distancing, for lack of a better term. I think the people I feel the most sorry for are the people who are still learning to sail, and hopefully some of those will be watching these webinars, and those people who are new to the sport. So the optimist sailor who's going to go for their very first sail this summer, because if you think about it, these people, they are the future of our sport. So I hope we can encourage all the aspects of sailing, but especially the people who are new to the sport, because they're going to be the people who are sailing in 20 years time. It must have been very frustrating for all those highly competent people who weren't allowed to get on the water, but hopefully we're past that stage now, and maybe we can go international racing in 2021 or even later this year. Time will tell. In terms of the lasers, it's worth checking out the ILCA website. The dates for next year's World Championships are now on there. So finally going to look at the books, because the idea is that hopefully people will fancy doing some extra reading after this is all over. The thing I would say, Alex has done a great job of recording these, so the previous webinar and this webinar will both be available on the Jon Emmett Sailing YouTube channel. If you want to see a bit you've missed, or maybe you even want to watch it twice, but that's there and that's available for you, and they will be there for as much, well, they'll be there forever, and you can share them with your friends. So these are the 5 books I've written. Basically, there's 3 categories. There's the coaching books, which is Be Your Own Sailing Coach and Coach Yourself to Win, which is about teaching yourself and making the most of every minute you have on the water. The tactics books, Be Your Own Tactics Coach and Tactics Made Simple. I think that's really another whole webinar in itself. But these are the things that I've seen day in, day out on racing, those common mistakes. And then the last one, Training to Win, for people who are wondering what exercises to go and do now they can get back on the water. Hopefully that's all laid out in a clear format. So yes, thank you very much, Alex. Were there any questions coming through or questions posed before we started?
There is one question. If you just have a look in the chat, but I'll just mention thank you for your time and effort for doing this stuff. It's a very good stuff that you are highlighting, the things what people need to think about, and it's what we can actually summarize from everything what we are doing now. It's a good time to think about your weaknesses or identify them, because in the normal time we are just doing, and we never have time to sit and think about what we've done. And this is probably an opportunity for all of us, even the coaches, even you and me, to think about what we've done and put it together and get to the next level as well. And also,
maybe especially the coaches.
yeah.
Maybe especially the coaches.
And thanks for mentioning the juniors one, because a lot of people are forgetting about the new generation. Everyone is thinking about how to maintain the focus, how to maintain the motivation. But I don't think the elite sailors will lose the motivation. They know it's a postponement in their head. They just put it in the different brackets and they move forward. While with the kids, it's a great opportunity now to attract more sailors, because they've been in a huge lockdown and they definitely miss the fresh air and the natural element. And we can really like attract way more sailors after these lockdowns. And I think this is also for many coaches who are attending this webinar, it's a really good target for as soon as things will get better to think about. Yeah.
Yep.
And John, there is one question. Do you have an answer for it? I'll just switch off the annotation.
Yes. Yeah. The annotation is probably not that helpful. So can you just read out the question for me?
Yeah. So it's just like people are asking how to maintain focus and to stay motivated while the things are happening with this COVID-19 and nothing is really clear. What you do probably is the best thing to share.
Well, I think I've been very, very busy with things like this. It's, yeah, I think to be busy or not to be busy, it's very much a choice. And there's always things that we can be spending our time on. I think the motivation is something which comes from within. And when you miss something, we say absence makes the heart grow fonder. And you need to think about all those really good sailing experiences you've had, and you will have them again. I actually think there's something very therapeutic, both physically and mentally, about being close to the water, and that's what you need to take with you. For me, it was never in doubt. I had 7 months out when I wrote my first book because of spinal injury, and I was pretty sure after that I was going to be a sailor / coach for life. But I'm sure people will come back to it, and maybe when you're choosing activities now, things like cycling are probably going to help your sailing, and just to take advantage of the situation as we've got now. I mean, I would like to think people will now have more time to listen to webinars such as yourself, or read books, or do those sort of things which people always say they never have time for. So now we discover whether people really didn't have time for them. That's why I say. So if you haven't done any boat work by now and you can get access to your boat, I think there's no excuses.
Thank you, John. And for the rest of the people, stay in touch with us and follow the next webinars. I just want to mention one thing about the next webinar. So we have a special guest, and probably he's well known these days, is Pavlos Contides, a 2-time world champion and Olympic silver medalist. So he's going to be our guest on Thursday, but there is a slight change with the timing because he's busy sailing, so we postpone it for 30 minutes. So it's going to start 5 p.m. Central European time. Thank you, everybody, and see you in 2 days' time.